despite interest rate hikes by the Central Bank of Nigeria to record a decline in Nigeria's inflation rate for the month of February, 21.9%. Latest figure from the National Bureau of Statistics shows that inflation rate for March 2023 climbed to 22.04%, representing a 0.13 percentage points increase compared to headline inflation in February. According to Consumer Price Index report, the rise in food inflation on a year-on-year basis is as a result of increases in prices of oil and fats, bread and cereals, potatoes, yam and other tubers, fish, fruits, meat, vegetables, and spirits. Well, this is the third consecutive hike in inflation for the year 2023. Well, let's start this week, and joining me to do that, to analyze the inflation figures for the month of March, is a partner, tax reporting and strategy with PricewaterhouseCoopers, Nigeria, Mr. Kenneth Erikume. Mr. Erikume, thank you so much for your time. It's been a while. It's good to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me, Tolu. I'm looking forward to our chat, indeed.
Yeah, let's get on it very quickly. The inflation figures came in over the weekend. I was saying that I was to take a little rest that weekend, but the figures were out. Of course, we had to get to work. But I want to ask you, what were you expecting, considering all of the challenges we face at this time? 22.04%. It's a slight increase of about 0.03% from what we had in the other month. It's the third increase this year. Were you expecting that, or something more, something less?
All right, Tolu. I think, just like most people, I was expecting the inflation figures to go up. And this is because of the clear impact at the very basic level, at the grassroots level, what we can see in terms of the price of goods and services. And it's been relentless for, several years. And it's not just Nigeria. I think globally, central banks and reserve banks have struggled to curb the inflation because, the attack and as well as energy. And when you look at Nigeria, which we're largely an import-dependent economy, those two things have had a direct impact on the cost of food items. Just to give you some context of, how this has impacted, the globe, the grains in Ukraine, due to the glut, they're pushing out cheap grains to neighboring countries like Hungary and Poland and co. And those countries have in turn tried to ban importation of grains, those cheap grains, in order to protect, even their domestic market. So there's no way you can really insulate yourself from what's going on globally. And then we had, earlier this year, the opening of the Chinese market. Since COVID, it was, one closure or the other. And now they've completely opened up. What that means is, you have a new set of consumers and pent-up demand for goods and services. And that's, China is a large population, economy. So there would be obviously an impact from that. And so when you look at all of these things, you really can't insulate yourself. So you're supposed to do the basic things to manage the inflation. Now, inflation, as most economists will tell you, is expected. But what they like, or what economists generally like, is that inflation, figure grows gradually. As against, it being sporadic and volatile. So a naturally growing economy would experience some level of inflation. But what we're seeing, in recent times, has been a massive challenge, and most people question the rates of inflation, but that's because maybe they do not see the complete picture of how things are computed. So things are really bad, from the food front, as you would obviously notice. But it's a combination of, food, goods, services, across different states, across rural and urban areas. So all of that has to be moderated and averaged before you come up with that rate. So, for me, I think, it looks reasonable. It just shows you that, there's, apart from the monetary policy, we've seen tightening of interest rates. The MPR is now at 18%. We've seen the cashless, well, not really the cashless, the redesign of the Naira. We've seen all sorts of policies, but it's just totally impossible to manage the inflation. I think that, apart from those monetary policies, like I always say, government needs to look at a combination with other things that, we can do, both from the fiscal side, especially around, infrastructure development and improving production. So that's my take on this.
Well, it's a good start, and I'd like to follow up on that same note. Fighting inflation with interest rate hike. It's what most countries are doing, even global economies. But it seems not to be working for us here. So can we be specific? What do we need to really look at? The IMF and World Bank is also talking about the Naira redesign, pushing more people into the poverty line. You've also identified what's happening with regards to interest rates and what it means for businesses. So what are those things we should do before we now start to complement the fiscal and the monetary side?
All right, thank you, Tolu. I think one of the things that people will tell you as well is that the managing inflation can be complicated, because one of the easiest ways to react to it is to throw monetary policy at it. But this seems to be a stubborn one that, as much as you throw, it's not going away. But what happens when, central banks continue to tighten on the monetary policy side, by, increasing interest rate, is that it could lead to recession. Obviously, from our side, in particular Nigeria, manufacturers are already, struggling and groaning under, the high interest rates. What that would mean if you continue to increase the interest rate is that they would seek, they would stop effectively, capital projects or expansion projects. And what those companies will begin to do is to go into survival mode, which is essentially from the cash which they generate and the profits which they generate, they try to retain as much as possible within the system and avoid borrowing. And so the country can contract, and then you begin to see some recession, like we've seen, not in the distant past. Now, what are those things we must do to ensure that we stay ahead? I think the first thing that government needs to pay particular focus on, and I must appreciate some of the strides we've taken around, doing, easing business and the enactment of the business facilitation miscellaneous act. So we must continue to ensure that the private sector is more empowered and given the enabling environment to thrive. Apart from the Business Facilitation Act, I think government has also done well with this Nigeria Startup Act, which is essentially going to stimulate more innovation, research and development around fintech, around tech generally, around use of data, which for me is the next level of development. We've seen several ages. We've seen this industrial age. We're now going into an age of data and innovation. So we must continue to look at where we can play to our strength as a country, including things like outsourcing, including ensuring that even though you said we shouldn't go into the fiscal, we must at this point begin to look at using fiscal devices as well to ensure that businesses are able to survive. And what you've seen, for example, in some other African countries during this period of high inflation is that some of them have begun to cut back on taxes relating to energy. And sometimes that tax cut is even converted to a subsidy where government even subsidizes some of those products. And I'm not saying that those countries have come out unscathed. It's just that, they've been able to soften the blow in these very trying times. Having said that, I think that the government hasn't done badly in terms of some of the reactions. Some of the reactions, obviously, questions will be raised around them. For example, the Naira redesign still has a bit of shadow hanging on it on how effective it was.
Interesting stuff. Now, I want us to look ahead and project. We expect subsidy to be removed anytime from now if you follow the PIA, full implementation of the PIA. If that happens, the price of PMS will surely go higher. On the other side, IMF is saying we should increase taxes. We've seen a lot of analysts saying that's not the way to go. That's in the fallout of the ongoing World Bank meeting in Washington, D.C. All of this put together, what sort of inflation figures are we going to expect if we are looking at all of these moves by government anytime soon?
Yes, so it depends on how those policies are implemented, I think. The first one on subsidy, and this conversation, if you remember, Tolu, many years ago under the administration of President Goodluck Jonathan, this conversation came up and the questions around palliatives to supplement the, to curb the impact on the most vulnerable. I think that, that conversation must again come back to the table, because the reality is that the government can't continue to carry the weight of subsidy. It is definitely not sustainable. And there's actually no way for the government to do it at this time, because, in terms of how much the government can borrow, it's reaching the limits. It's even bust through the limits, to be fair. So there is really nowhere to go. And the reality is that, if you are going to the external market to borrow as well, you must have fixed some of these fundamentals, and some of these people who are able to give us some aid, give us, some loans, have raised the questions, why should we do it? If you're carrying this subsidy that is not productive. So in the end, it may have to go, but the government must look at it carefully, such that it is not, what I mentioned, inflation is not really a problem. It is an abrupt increase in inflation. So government must phase the removal of fuel subsidy so that it happens over a reasonable period of time, while giving the citizens the ability to adjust. That's one. The second one is that there must clearly be some palliatives to ensure that the impact is absorbed. And those palliatives should actually focus on the most vulnerable. You know, the problem we have today is that subsidy as it currently exists, you know, poor people feel like they're benefiting from it, but the reality is that they're not benefiting as much as the rich people who have several cars, luxury cars, you know, have, you know, and even the potential diversion of petroleum products. You know, that's not a common man's problem, you know. So government must bring in, you know, those sort of palliatives that deal with the cost of transportation. You know, apart from transportation, with the hike in the price of diesel for many years, a lot of people have, you know, transformed their energy supplement mechanisms, you know, because that's just the reality of this market. That, you know, the discos are unable to deliver 24 hours electricity. So people have got to look at generators. But because of the cost of diesel, many people have gone into solar, many people have gone into inverters, and many people have also done petrol generators, because in the end, it becomes cheaper. So government must also look at that, at ensuring that there is, and in collaboration with the private sector, ensuring that there is more energy sustainability and stability, you know, for the common man. So I think that, you know, if they're able to package the phasing of the subsidy removal and, you know, specific programs that focus on palliatives to the most vulnerable, I think it can be managed. It will not eliminate it, because it's going to be, it's going to be serious, because there are a lot of, there's a significant ecosystem currently in Nigeria that relies on petrol for their sustenance.
Can we manage? Okay, let me just add this while you make your submission, so we wrap up on that note. Can we manage any form of tax increase at this time, following the suggestions of IMF and World Bank?
That was the point which I thought I missed, that I was just trying to come back to.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So,
wow.
Of the World Bank around tax increases to manage some of the developing economies. And I think that NECA's submission makes absolute sense to me. What we see in Nigeria historically has been that because of the low tax to GDP ratio, government has taken short-term measures to boost revenue. And those short-term measures are simply focused on increasing the rate of tax, or increasing the activity of tax audit. Now, what you're doing with that sort of approach is that you're squeezing the life out of the compliant taxpayers. And this, in all the jurisdictions where tax rates have been increased and so on, it is on the basis that, you know, they've been able to establish an inclusive tax administration ecosystem. If it is not inclusive, it is only those who are compliant that you're essentially going to be killing, right? The people who are able to evade, you know, taxes will continue to be outside the tax net. And you will create a disincentive for them to become compliant. So you push them more into the informal sector. And that's what we've seen in Nigeria. When we did the rebasing of our GDP, you know, and we began to recognize some of those sectors, you know, the entertainment, you know, the, you know, various sectors that we brought into the basket, we couldn't bring in the tax, you know, relating to those economic activities into the system as well. So while we are able to record the economic activity, we're unable to record the tax component from those activities. And for me, I think the first step is not to increase taxes. The first step is to still deal with this issue of making the tax administration system more inclusive so that more taxpayers are in the tax net. And I was having a conversation with a few people at the FIRS on this, and I've had some of these conversations with some state IRSs before. We need to start moving to a risk-based approach to tax administration, where you create that triangle of those who are at the top, and everybody aspires to be those people at the top. Those are people with, good corporate governance and, high level of compliance. Those people, government must incentivize, encourage, relieve them from the burden of multiple audits, and then focus the tax administration resources on the lower base of the triangle, where most of the tax evaders are sitting. I think if we do that, we can change the dynamic of our revenue collection before we start to talk about tax increase. I think tax increase, we've seen a lot of increases in the past, few years. The finance bills, first of all, came up with, the ease of doing business angle, the, equity angle, and so on. But in recent times, we've seen significant rate increases, whether it is, the 10 naira per liter on, carbonated soft drinks, whether it is the introduction of excise on telecommunications, which is on hold at the moment, whether it's the increase in, tertiary education tax from 2% to 2.5%, whether it's the increase of VAT rate from, 5% to 7.5%, the significant economic presence. We've seen multiple increases in tax rates and the tax regime. So that's not the solution. The solution is more in the sophistication and inclusiveness of the tax administration system.
I must thank you so much, partner tax reporting and strategy at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. Kenneth Erikume. Thank you so much for starting the week with us on Business Nigeria. Wish you a profitable week.
Thank you, sir. Enjoy your week as well.
All right, then.